ended part one with all my guests absolutely convinced that the real problem is not Swaraj Kaushal, but his wife, the Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. So now we're going to turn and examine the case against Sushma Swaraj, and we're going to go through it meticulously, step by step. Let me start with you, Mr. Sundaram. First, Mrs. Swaraj used her power as Foreign Minister to help Lalit Modi obtain a British travel document at a time when the government had revoked his passport, thus A, undermining the revocation, and B, she did so unilaterally without consulting even the Foreign Secretary. In your eyes, does that amount to abuse of power, or is that an exaggerated conclusion?
There are two great faults I see in this. One, when you are a minister in a government, which government has seen fit rightly or wrongly to revoke a passport? Which government has seen fit rightly or wrongly to issue notices and wants to bring a person to book? Which government has also seen fit to give an alert notice, howsoever light the color may be, to even assist such a person, and further his comfort in staying away from the country, I find highly objectionable, per se. The second part of it is, when the association with this person, albeit maybe through the husband, over 22 years as a very close relationship, so close that the husband is a friend, is a lawyer and a prospective director, to assist such a person, which is also an assistance which is against the avowed policy of the government, in that given case, I find extremely objectionable.
Okay.
And I cannot see an excuse to either of these two.
Tavleen Singh, let's take up the second argument against Sushma Swaraj. She acted to help a man who was at that time her daughter's client. Lalit Modi said on camera that Bansuri had been his lawyer for 4 years. She also acted to help someone who had been her husband's client. Her husband has told the Indian Express he's been Lalit Modi's lawyer for 22 years. Does this make it conflict of interest on top of the earlier abuse of power?
For a start, I don't think that there was anything wrong in what she did. I think Arima's wrong in saying that this government revoked Lalit Modi's passport. It was the last government that did.
The government of India is one. The government doesn't vary. Otherwise, they would have called back the revocation themselves. They have continued. They have continued the earlier order.
The passport.
So government can't be split
was given back to him.
But not at the time when Mrs. Swaraj acted.
By the court.
Just a moment. The passport was given back, but not at the time when Mrs. Swaraj acted. But the point I'm asking you is not about the giving back of the passport. The point I'm asking you is it right to act in the interest of someone who is your husband's client and your daughter's client? Does that amount to conflict of interest?
Unless you do it openly. She could have been completely open about this and said, my daughter and my husband work for this man, but his wife is very sick and she has to go for treatment.
But she didn't do it openly.
The treatment she was given.
But she didn't do it openly, and she didn't do it even by consulting the Foreign Secretary.
That is wrong.
So does that wrong amount to conflict of interest? Does that amount to conflict of interest?
Well, it certainly, I think it does, and it certainly amounts to impropriety.
Okay, conflict of interest and impropriety from Tavleen Singh, abuse of power earlier from Arima Sundaram. Aditi Fadnis, there's a third argument or case against Sushma Swaraj. A year before she acted to help him get a British travel document, her husband, Swaraj Kaushal, had written to Lalit Modi by email, this has been revealed by the Sunday Times in Britain, asking Lalit Modi to help secure admission into a British university for his nephew, Jyotirmoy Kaushal. Does that background now make this a form of quid pro quo?
It could, it might not. I don't know enough about it. I think the family did not really need anybody's help to get the nephew admitted.
But they asked. That's the important point.
They may have told him to take care of it.
No, forgive me. I will quote to you exactly what that email says, because it's public property.
Yeah.
Swaraj Kaushal wrote to Lalit Modi saying, can you please approach Keith Vaz to help his nephew get into university? And he then added, in England, Keith Vaz is like the Prime Minister or next after the Prime Minister. Keith Vaz was approached by Lalit Modi. In return, Keith Vaz asked Lalit Modi to get for him the boy's CV and other documents. Now, we don't know whether in the end this led to the boy getting into university. That we don't know. But what we do know is that Swaraj Kaushal asked Lalit Modi for help. And now when in return, 9 months later, Lalit Modi asks Mrs. Swaraj for help, is it a quid pro quo?
Yeah, I mean, you can establish a quid pro quo quite easily.
You can?
Yeah.
So once again, this looks wrong.
Yeah, it does.
Abhishek Singhvi, you're a lawyer. I'm going to put to you the fourth case against Sushma Swaraj. And it's got nothing to do with the three arguments I've presented so far. It's entirely to do with the Prevention of Corruption Act, Section 13(1)(d)(3). For the sake of the audience, I'll read out that one section. A public servant is said to commit the offence of criminal misconduct if he, while holding office as a public servant, obtains for any person any valuable thing or pecuniary advantage without any public interest. Some people would say a British travel document is a very valuable thing and no public interest whatsoever is served by helping Lalit Modi obtain one. So my question is simple. You're a lawyer. Prima facie, is Mrs. Swaraj guilty of breaching 13(1)(d)(3)?
I hate to say that, yes. You are converting from a devil's advocate to a good advocate. You should add, Karan, that in that section, which is precisely the section on which a whole set of summons was issued to the Prime Minister and others by Bharat Parashar of the CBI court, no quid pro quo is necessary. You have, of course, separately established quid pro quo in your earlier questioning. But that section requires no quid pro quo. Only the mere absence of public interest coupled with a benefit to the recipient is sufficient to implicate the public servant. Now, incidentally, a whole summons, a whole 80-page order has been already issued. It's a different matter that it has been stayed by the Supreme Court in proceedings where I also appear as a counsel for Dr. Manmohan Singh. But the point of the matter is, Karan, that A, it is clearly quid pro quo in a variety of means. B, there is an element of surreptition, which you have missed out in mentioning because she is bypassing a ministry and foreign secretary. So she is trying to hide something. Humanitarian aid to Nepal is given in 24 hours because a file can move that fast. Humanitarian aid is not given without a file moving in the government of India. A chaprati is 10 rupees requires a file. Third, there is no quid pro quo required in any case for that section which you have rightly quoted.
In which case, Lalin Kohli, what is your defense?
This is going to take a few moments. First of all, I'm surprised by Dr. Singhvi's rather liberal interpretation of Section 13(1)(d). Essentially, the word there is obtain, and I'm sure there are many Supreme Court judgments that point out what has she obtained, what has she received. One is unable to understand that. Because in substance, the 15 cases, hold on.
She is not the one who has to obtain. You're using the word obtain wrongly. That's why I'm interrupting you. Forgive me. I'm interrupting because you're using the word obtain wrongly. No, Lalit Modi, Mrs. Swaraj doesn't have to obtain anything. She has to obtain for any person.
To obtain
No, you're using the word obtain wrongly. Lalin Kohli, I'm interrupting you and I apologize, but you're using the word obtain wrongly. It's not that Sushma, let me finish. It's not that Sushma Swaraj has to obtain something. It's the opposite. She has to obtain for any person. In other words, she helps some person obtain.
Again, you are mixing Mr. Swaraj Kaushal's professional fees, which have continued for a fairly long period of time, much before, as you pointed out, even Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government came. So let's go back to the substance of it. There are the enforcement directorate cases. Where is there an interference with it? If it is about helping a person who's run away from the country, then perhaps Dr. Singhvi would like to throw light on the Sant Chatwal case. He was an absconder, a declared absconder who received the Padam Shri by the UPA Congress government and continues to have serious cases against him even in the United States.
Okay.
Now, fascinatingly, by that argument, is the Congress going to say they apologize and they won't contest the next election because they are already out of office?
Let me bring in RMS Sundaram because the whole thing turns upon a legal interpretation of whether 13(1)(d)(3) applies to Mrs. Swaraj or not. Forgive me, but for the sake of the audience who doesn't know that section as well as my other three guests, I want to repeat that. And then I want to ask you, Mr. Sundaram, whether you think Mrs. Swaraj is prima facie guilty of breaching it. This is what section 13(1)(d)(3) says. A public servant who is said to commit the offence of criminal misconduct if he, while holding office as a public servant, obtains for any person any valuable thing or pecuniary advantage without any public interest. Is Mrs. Swaraj prima facie guilty of breaching this, Mr. Sundaram?
The answer to your question is not that simple, Karan, because there are two jurisdictional facts required. One, she should have obtained something for them, and second, it should be a valuable thing. The two questions which will come up in such a case is whether it was she who obtained for him the travel document, or whether she had merely given a recommendation, what was her role in obtaining it. Second, as to whether the travel document was a valuable thing. I think these are the two questions which will really come up.
Okay.
And if the answer to these two questions is yes, it is a valuable thing, and B, she was materially responsible for obtaining it for him, without a doubt, it would fall within the mischief of the section.
I want to question you further, Mr. Sundaram. I want to question you further. Most people would say a British travel document is a very valuable thing, particularly in the circumstances where without it, Lalit Modi could not have left the shores of Great Britain. Therefore, for him, it would have meant either the right to travel or denial of travel. Let me come to your first problem. Did Mrs. Swaraj help obtain a valuable thing or not? What Mrs. Swaraj did was to indicate to the British High Commissioner that there would be no adverse impact on Indo-British relations if that travel document was granted. And in fact, what she was doing was to set aside earlier objections, I believe given in writing by Chidambaram to George Osborne, specifically saying that if travel documents were granted, it would affect Indo-British relations. In her conversation with James Bevan, the High Commissioner, she set that aside. She, in other words, overruled Chidambaram and said Chidambaram's obstacle no longer applies. That problem won't affect this government. Would that amount to obtaining or would it not?
The answer to that is, if the reason it was not given was that objection, and the removal of that objection was the direct cause of the travel document being given, the removal of the obstacle, which was the obstacle against giving it, then she did obtain it.
The Sunday Times articles, Keith Vaz's correspondence in particular, which is in the open domain, clearly suggest that in fact that obstacle was the reason why the travel document was in the first instance refused. When that obstacle was removed by Mrs. Cole in the second instance, and on the second application, the travel document was given. Therefore, that removal of obstacle amounts to obtaining. Yes or no, Mr. Sundaram? A quick answer.
Yes, that is my view. Yes.
Nalin Kohli,
yes, that is
you've just heard an independent lawyer,
no, that's okay.
And you've heard his argument.
I'm not going to get into a legal argument here. We can do it in court if the need arises. Let's get back to the first part. I find a fascinating paradox. If Mr. Lalit Modi was so valuable that it took Mr. Chidambaram the need to write a letter to George Osborne to say it would impact Indo-UK relations, why was he allowed to leave in the first case? And why was such weak...
Because at that time, can I answer? Because at that time, the Enforcement Directorate had no questions to ask him.
Act. There were a host of other things you could have
At that time when he left, the Enforcement Directorate had no questions to ask him. Those questions and the summons came up after he'd left the country. At the time he left the country, he wasn't wanted. He was a free man with the right to leave.
That may be a convenient coincidence, but we don't expect...
It happens to be the truth.
No, absolutely.
It happens to be the truth. You can't dismiss it by calling it convenient.
Why only FEMA? Why not the Money Laundering Act? There are other provisions available. So
at
therefore,
the moment, even your
this.
government hasn't raised it to the Money Laundering Act. It is still FEMA. The 15 notices Mr. Jaitley talked about are all FEMA.
Mr. Thapar, in the last 3 years of their government, the Congress didn't. 3 years is a sufficiently long period of time.
But even in 1 year of your government, you haven't raised it to PMLA.
Suppose it happens in 1 year, 1 month. Let me make a presumption. Suppose it happens in 1 year, 1 month. So we are 3 times faster than the UPA government. So the law of averages is not so easy to look at.
Let me go to Abhishek Singhvi. You've just heard an independent lawyer, Mr. Areva Sundaram, take me through the entire argument and come to the conclusion that this is clearly a case of obtaining something valuable for Lalit Modi without any public interest, and therefore Mrs. Swaraj is guilty of 13(1)(d)(3). He's not a Congress party lawyer, he's not a BJP lawyer, he's an independent lawyer and one of the most respected Supreme Court lawyers in the country. Will Congress then take up this specific charge against Mrs. Swaraj? Because this is one that you have not made cogently, effectively, forcefully.
Look, Karan, 3 or 4 short sentences. We have categorically said this earlier. I said it today just now, a short while ago. The law is established under this section, published Supreme Court judgment which say no quid pro quo is required. The passport travel document she was dispositive in obtaining, and the fact that she is the one, that it is valuable is obvious because Mr. Modi was not moving heaven and earth if it was not valuable. So all the conditions which you have succinctly pointed out are met. Now I cannot commit on television whether A or B will take proceedings, but clearly prima facie, ultimately it's for courts to decide, offences of under this section, the basic ingredients, the conditions precedent, the jurisdictional conditions are all met out. You are right, absolutely, Karan, that in this cacophony of different programs, different speakers over a period of 2 weeks, some points remain, some points get lost out.
Okay.
But it's a point very clearly taken.
I've seen Nalin Kohli's finger go up. Even though I'm out of time, it's only fair, Nalin Kohli, that you should have 20 seconds. But mark my words, 20 seconds is all I can give you because we're already over.
Don't need more. If that's going to be the new norm, I'm sure it's going to be fascinating to look at any cases where advocates have served in the government and relatives of theirs have actually represented clients who may have had work to do with the ministry directly or indirectly. It would open up a Pandora's box, but if it is to open in the courts, many lawyers will get a lot of work.
Lots of us look forward to Pandora's boxes opening up. You never know what surprise pops out of the box. You might even find one that you like. After all, a Pandora's box can sometimes bring a smile to one's face. My thanks to my 4 guests for joining me. My thanks also to you for coming to studio. And if you have been, thanks for watching.